ready to totally revamp your course or your entire science program, or if you're just ready to maybe hone a couple of things in your course and nibble off a little bit at a time, there's a ton of information to read. There are number of appendices to this here, and so this video is going to try to help you do it more efficiently. You probably want to get around to reading all the stuff at some point, but if you're trying to look for the most important stuff at the beginning that's going to give the most impact, this video is going to help you do that. To start off with, the front matter, structure, conceptual shifts, response to public, college readiness, all standards, the 3 dimensions link here at the bottom, all of these items. These are things that I would say you don't have to read up front. If you already know that you're going to be doing a lot of stuff in your course, or if you're pressed for time to make some changes, those are more big picture items. I think you'll get a lot of the same impact from just the things that I'm going to point out here, so I'm not going to talk about those. If you've already watched the video on breaking down NGSS, you'll remember disciplinary core ideas, the science and engineering practices, and the cross-cutting concepts. Those are the big 3 areas. That's where they get their logo. And these appendices have some helpful stuff for you. So disciplinary core ideas, it describes them in general, but the really handy thing is for each core idea, they show the level of increasing sophistication of student thinking in each content area. So from kindergarten all the way through high school, it shows how each standard and each performance outcome is developed. So this would be a really good table for you to start with. The next big idea that is worth a look are the science and engineering practices. These are 8 things, 8 verbs that students need to be able to do, from asking questions all the way through performing experiments and giving out the information at the end. Not all standards have all 8 of these, so it's worth a look here to see them all together and see how they flow. What this document also does is breaks down each of those into what they look like as they progress from K through 12. So this is looking at asking questions. What does that mean as a kindergartner? What does that mean as a high schooler? It goes through each of those on a separate multi-page section of this. And if you scroll down to the end, they have maybe a more printable version of that that's color-coded, but it's basically the same information there. The next appendix, the cross-cutting concepts, is set up pretty much the same way as the practices. It explains what they are at the beginning, things like patterns. Patterns show up in all areas of science. So if students understand the importance of looking for patterns and learning from them, that's going to go a long way toward any field. I guess I should say I'm skipping a lot of really good information for reading. I'm just trying to show you the handy tables, because efficiency-wise, those are going to be the best bang for your buck as far as time spent. But they go through like the practices did and look at each cross-cutting concept individually. So here it's patterns, and it looks at that range from K all the way through 12. And like with the practices at the bottom, there's a colorful chart that might be a little bit more easy for you to use when you print it out and try to access it later. There is also a spreadsheet that shows each pattern and where it shows up with which standards. So if you go about this as an approach of, I'm going to teach my students about scale and proportion, you may not have to worry about that K through 2. I'm going to jump a little bit out of order, looking at the nature of science and then the science, technology, society, and the environment, because these are 2 areas that when you teach, it's easy to kind of gloss over these or think that I'm having students conduct experiments and doing things like that, and so they're understanding the nature of science, like that's what science is about. But if you don't explicitly tell students, like, hey, this is what science is about, they may not realize it. Or if you don't specifically tell them how science, technology, and society influence each other, they may miss the bigger picture and just look at the task they're performing. So these areas, I think, are good for honing what you think you're already doing well. For nature of science, there's some good stuff to read through. There's a simple bulleted list of the things that students should realize, like, oh, we base things on empirical evidence. And it has a handy, colorful table of the levels of understanding they should have at the different grade levels. If we look at science, technology, and society, it's set up pretty much the same way. There's important stuff to read at the beginning, or if you're like me, you just skip ahead to the pretty pictures. So a nice matrix to show what understandings they need at the different levels. And it also has the table at the bottom of which performance expectations correspond with the different understandings of science, technology, and society. Now, the appendix that I skipped on engineering design, it's really important, and I think it's a little bit beyond just honing what you do. A lot of instructors will have students do engineering tasks like let's do the egg drop and build something that protects it, but engineering is a different field from science, so reading through this may help you understand why it is important to understand the engineering aspects of it, not just why it's, a better task for students to do, but explains things like the areas. So engineers define problems, they use things like criteria and constraints. If you don't talk about criteria and constraints, you're not necessarily teaching the engineering skills and the way to think about things. So they'll define the problem, they develop solutions, they test it and optimize it. I think lots of times science and science class implementations of engineering just live in the develop solution area. So they look at the problem, look at the scientific facts, they'll test it. They don't necessarily do a lot in these two circles. So read through these, make sure that you're doing the appropriate age level items. And again, we have the handy table of which performance expectations correspond to the different engineering levels. I'm going to go out of order again and look at the Math Common Core and the Literacy Common Core. It's set up two different ways. The first is according to the math teachers. So if we're looking at these different math outcomes, these are the grades where they should be happening. But also it's set up from the science teacher's perspective, going through each level of standard. So here we're looking at K through 2 motion and stability. This is the Common Core math standard that corresponds with the kindergartners talking about motions and forces. They do not have a handy table on here, so you'll just have to go through and read a bunch of words on a page. It's way less fun. The English people, the literacy standards, however, are organized by a table because they, of course, will not do anything the same way that the math people do, even identify terms. And here, rather than organizing it by content area, they're organized by the practice. So science and engineering practice of asking questions, these are the literacy standards that make sense to go along with students asking questions. It goes through all 8 of the practices in this manner, and being in a table, it is a little bit easier to read. The appendix I skipped again is the model course mapping, and this is something that when you're ready for the deep dive, read through this really well. Have your administrators read through it really well because it shows the complexity of what happens. It's not a half-day in-surface kind of a process. They go through basically a story. Could be made up people, I don't know, but basically a case study to show how teachers went through what they did on their first pass through the standards, what they did on the second pass through the standards, and how at the end they were able to course map things out basically in 3 courses that they're rearranging. So again, they're looking at the entire program of middle school or high school, how they make more complex concept maps, connecting ideas and what idea leads into the next. It describes the process that they went through to make a revision of those and shows how they've rearranged things now. So they're in the order that they should be taught among the courses. They moved ideas from course 1 to course 2, from course 2 to course 1, from course 1 all the way to course 3. So they're making major changes because they think it fits better. This, again, takes a lot of time, and teachers need that time. So administrators give them time, snacks, pay for doing this. And a final really helpful thing in this document is toward the bottom, page 34, we have factors for consideration. So with each pass, or definitely at the end to check up and make sure it's been done correctly. So with each pass, so you don't have to change a lot of things at the end, think about, are the performance expectations organized in a way to maximize student learning, and other very deep questions like that. So you'll want to spend a lot of time with this document when you are ready for a major revamp of not just one course, but a set of courses. And then one final thing, when you're looking at a course revamp, is under implementation there are, or will be, lots of resources. They have great things like assessment tasks, so samples of things. So far, all they have is a rubric for lessons and units. After explaining how to use the rubric, we see things that they want to make sure you're doing are aligning it to NGSS. Now, NGSS says, like, hey, you don't have to align it perfectly because nothing's going to align perfectly with any set of standards. You're going to individualize things, so optimize it. Looking at the instructional support, so the learning environment that's going to make all of this possible, and how you're going to monitor progress. So what kinds of assessments? They have performance expectations at the end that students should be able to achieve. So are you making sure along the way that they're going to get there? And this is all individualized for each teacher to figure out on their own. And underneath that, you have a set of worksheets, for lack of a better word, that allow you to think about and provide evidence for how you're aligning to the standards, how you are providing those instructional supports that you need, and ways that you can improve it. So it's a good self-check. So keep that in mind. Check back occasionally to see if these other things have popped up. And overall, just think about, especially with the idea that they're trying to change the entire learning environment, think about how you can work with the other science teachers in your department, reaching out to math and English to build something more cohesive. That's really all they're looking for, is cohesion across the grades, across the subjects. So, good luck.